All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, coming your way on a Sunday afternoon with a live stream at 5 o'clock Eastern time. We've got one of my originals on the line, Joe Lisi from Go for the Two. It's been a while since we've had Joe on the line. I was able to track him down this weekend. And if you think my brain is full of facts and stats and information, you have no idea. Joe, I appreciate you coming on board.
Oh, always a pleasure, Mark. Any chance to talk college football with you. Love the show and love talking college football. Chomping at the bit for week number one. We have about 2.5 months away, but we should be kicking it into gear within the next few months.
So I believe the countdown's at 85 days. So what, Andre Wadsworth away from college football's kickoff. And I've noticed a ton of great stats, information that I learn about each time I track down your Twitter feed. So I would encourage college football fans, you guys are nuts. You should load yourself down with information and stats to get ready for 2018. And the way to do that is you jump on Joe's Twitter feed at Go for the Two, and then you hook up with everything else that he's got going on. So before we dive into this, besides the Twitter, Joe, where can people find you?
Yeah, they can follow me on my webpage at goforthe2.com. I'm also my second preview up on Amazon, the goforthe2.com Power 5 preview. Break down all the strengths and weaknesses for each Power 5 team, cover about 90 teams in general. And then all of my work is up there on goforthe2.com.
So, Joe, let's start with the ACC. It appears to be the most cut and dry conference. Clemson is the class. Florida State doesn't seem quite ready, although from an NFL standpoint, have the most ready roster along with Miami to challenge Clemson. NC State kind of missed their window with the three studs along the defensive front last year, although Ryan Finley's coming back. Miami and the Coastal seems to be the class, although they've got to go to Blacksburg this coming fall. Your thoughts about the ACC, and certainly drop a ton of stats and information on us that we may not know about, trying to forecast this race.
Yeah, I mean, there's some quality teams within the ACC, and it starts with the Clemson Tigers, like we mentioned. I mean, 3 straight college football playoff appearances. To me, they are the strongest team in the conference heading into 2018. Unbelievable job that Dabo Swinney and Brett Venables have done in Death Valley over the last couple of years, especially when you think about the defensive talent lost, Mark. Guys like Vic Beasley, guys like Shaq Lawson, Kevin Dodd, Mackenzie Alexander, Ben Boulware. The list goes on and on and on. And all they do is reload each and every year on the defensive side of the ball, eerily similar to what Nick Saban and Alabama have done in Tuscaloosa. You look at this team over the last 3 years, 20-3 overall on the road or on a neutral field site. That's an 869 winning percentage. And the teams that they defeated last year on the road, ACC opponents, Virginia Tech, Louisville, NC State. They also defeated South Carolina and Miami. They beat those teams by 21.2 points per game. They were tied with USC for tops in FBS and sacks with 46. 27% third down defense, and held opposing offenses to 112 rushing yards per game. They are the clear-cut favorite to win their half of the Atlantic. Again, it starts at the quarterback position. A lot of people have said Trevor Lawrence will get the nod over Kelly Bryant. I don't see it. You look at Kelly Bryant, he's an athletic quarterback. Feaster comes back. ETN comes back. When you look at Bryant, Feaster, and ETN, those players combined for 2,100 rushing yards, 31 rushing touchdowns. That's a dynamic triple threat. They are the clear-cut favorite. Schedule favors them as well. So I love Clemson to make it back to the college football playoff for year number 4. But a team that I'm also looking at as well within the conference is Louisville. Louisville loses Lamar Jackson. They reload with Jawan Pass, who was a 5-star recruit, but they possibly have one of the most dynamic wide receiver cores within the conference. Guys like Jalen Smith, Des Fitzpatrick, and Seth Dawkins combined for 147 receptions, over 2,300 receiving yards, and 20 receiving touchdowns. I picked them at 9-3 overall. I think they could be there, and I think they could challenge Alabama week number 1 because of their offensive speed on the perimeter. So I look for Bobby Petrino to reload overall, and I have my eyes on Louisville for a very successful 2018 season. You look at NC State, Ryan Finley, senior quarterback, he comes back, but a lot of pieces lost on the defensive side of the ball. Bradley Chubb is gone. Hill is gone. You look at Jalen Samuels, they're all-purpose tight end / H-back. He moves on. It's going to put a lot of pressure on that offensive staff to find another playmaker to really step up and duplicate Samuel's numbers. They do have a solid wide receiver core led by Kelvin Harmon. But I think NC State takes a minor step back. They were 9-4 last year. I think they're right in the area of 8-4. They're going to need to reload that defensive talent. So we'll see how it plays out for Dave Doran. When you look at the flip side of a team that I'm not too high on, everybody is expecting Willie Taggart and Florida State to overexceed expectations. This was a team last year that lost 5 of 6 games within the ACC. They lost those games by 12.4 points per game. Now, granted, I know DeAndre Francois was injured in week number 1, and they started the year with James Blackman after that. But defensively, they did not step up against elite competition within the conference. And you look at their schedule for 2018, they have the hardest 2018 schedule within the ACC. Their FBS opponents have a combined overall winning percentage of 631%. And that week 1 matchup against Virginia Tech, with or without Josh Jackson, is no joke. So I picked Florida State at 7-5 overall. Another team that I'm down on, Boston College, have one of the hardest ACC schedules, 85-57 overall. They do have A.J. Dillon, but defensively they lose Harold Landry. And more importantly, this was an offense that couldn't stretch defenses vertically. So I picked Boston College at the bottom of their division at 5-7 overall. So we'll see how it plays out in 2018. But I do also think that Virginia Tech could surprise some people, even though Josh Jackson is isn't suspended. Their combined winning percentage of their 2018 opponents, 495%. They could possibly start 8-0 with or without Josh Jackson.
Yeah, it's a Boston College team that people like, but at the same time, as you mentioned, they get the rough draw out of the Coastal with Miami and Virginia Tech, the 2 best teams in that division that they have to face. They also have a rough one at Purdue. Interesting matchup early season, BC and Purdue. I'm looking out for that one as an under the radar, really good matchup. And you mentioned A.J. Dillon. He's great. Just a freshman, had to lug it 300 times. John Hilleman, the former starter, ran off to Rutgers. So if Dillon gets hurt, they may be missing something out of the backfield there. And they still have a quarterback situation with obviously Brown, the starter, but Perry will have something to say about that in August. And interesting situation there in the Coastal and the Atlantic Division. And for Florida State, as you mentioned, I think they've got a great roster that is the 2nd or 3rd best in the conference. But yeah, the rough draw with Florida and Notre Dame in the non-conference as well.
Yeah, all right. Miami too, Mark. I just want to say, you look at Miami's road games or on a neutral field site, the teams that they had to play last year, teams like North Carolina, Florida State, Duke, and Pittsburgh, they beat those teams only by 11.3 points per game. So that week 1 matchup for Miami is not going to be easy against LSU, with or without Darius Geis there. I mean, we know he's moved on to the NFL. They don't have an elite power back heading into 2018. Joe Burrow does transfer over, but from a physicality on the offense and defensive lines, they're going to challenge the Hurricanes. So that's not an easy game for Miami or a layup. They need to win that game to kickstart their 2018 campaign.
It's been since 1974 that LSU did not bring back a running back who rushed for a touchdown the season before. And of course, they've had that line of Jeremy Hill, Leonard Fournette, and Darius Geis, and nobody seemingly that's able to replace those guys. Nick Brissett is one of the backs in play there. LeClaire as well at LSU. So while we're talking Tigers, why don't we just stay in the SEC? And the conventional wisdom is that Alabama dominates the West and Georgia the East, and they meet in Atlanta, and we already know what's going to happen, Joe.
Yeah, I'm with that agreement, but I think it's a little bit different. I don't think Alabama makes the college football playoff. I'm betting against them. I haven't been right in recent years. Picked them to win the West. They didn't disappoint, but I'll start with Alabama. Clearly the best team in college football, and you can't argue what Nick Saban's done. 6 national championships, 5 at Alabama, 1 in LSU, has an opportunity to really overtake Bear Bryant with his 7 national championship this coming season. You look at Alabama, they've dominated the SEC over the last couple of years. They're 17-1 against SEC opponents and have won those games by 26.3 points per game. They haven't lost a week 1 matchup since 2001 against UCLA, and they've won those games by 24.8 points per game. But I look at their offense last year. In the first 8 games of the year, Mark, they averaged 298 rushing yards per game. They won those 8 games by 33.3 points per game. Last 6 games of the year, minus Mercer, they only averaged 170 rushing yards per game. So even though they won the national championship, they were a different offense down the stretch. In the last 6 games of the year, their margin of victory was only 10.5 points per game. Now, you have new coordinators, new coordinator Mike Loxley on the offensive side of the ball, co-defensive coordinators on the defensive side of the ball. Even though they were on staff, it's different when you're position coach, and now you have to make a game plan against opposing offenses. I've always said this: new coordinators could be more or less aggressive than their predecessor, and you're seeing the game through a different set of eyes. Those coordinators have to understand how talent responds in game situations, and then they have to call a game plan around that talent. You lost Calvin Ridley, even though Ruggs led the team in terms of touchdown receptions. They didn't light it up from a wide receiver perspective. Even though Jerry Jeudy's there, it's going to put a lot of pressure on either Tua or Jalen Hurts to find a go-to wide receiver. Najee Harris, Damian Harris come back. But I look at their November schedule. LSU, Miss State, and Auburn, they navigated through that last year. I think it's going to be a little difficult this year. Not sold on Alabama as an elite team because of the defensive talent. Lost. I'm betting against them. They win the West, but are on the outside looking in. Pick them at 10-2. So I think they'll win the West, but I think they face Georgia as well. When you look at Georgia, what can you say? In 12 of their 15 games, Mark, they rushed for over 200 yards. That's a dynamic statistic. When you look at some of the teams that they didn't rush for over 200 yards against, it was Alabama. It was Notre Dame. They rushed for 185 against Notre Dame in that win. So DeAndre Swift comes back. Elijah Holyfield comes back. The loss of Javon Wims is going to be huge, in my opinion, to complement Terry Godwin. They do have Hardeman that comes back, but still, that's going to put a lot of pressure on Jake Fromm to start fast. There's no margin of error for Georgia this year. And defensively, they lost a ton of talent. Roquan Smith, Lorenzo Carter, Bellamy. It is Kirby Smart, but I think this team takes a minor step back. I'm picking them at 12-2 overall. We'll see how it plays out, but both of those teams win their divisions, but I don't think they're college football playoff teams in 2018.
So, Joe, I named Mississippi State one of my 10 dark horses for 2018. They had the 10th ranked defense in the country last year. They bring back Montez Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons along the defensive end position. So those guys will put big pressure on the quarterback. They've got their top 2 tacklers back, both safeties. And, of course, Arius Williams at running back. Nick Fitzgerald seems to be healthy and ready to go for 2018. They pick up the number 1 JUCO player at wide receiver as well. So I'll throw them out, and I'll throw out South Carolina. Of course, Will Muschamp doing a tremendous job lifting them from 3 to 6 to 9 wins. Now it gets tough. You can build a program and do a great job in elevating the team from 3 to 9 wins, not discrediting that, but to go from 9 to like 11, now you're starting to run into like top 15 teams to try to up the ante to 11 wins. So your thoughts about South Carolina and Mississippi State?
Yeah, great points you bring up. We'll start with Mississippi State. I mean, Sweat and Simmons are going to be 2 of the most dominant defensive players in the SEC this year. This was a Mississippi State team that held opposing offenses to 128 rushing yards per game. And I'm in agreement with you. Offensively, this could be a very explosive offense. A lot of starters come back on the offensive line, a physical blue-collar group. But the biggest addition is their head coach, Joe Moorhead. For those that haven't seen Joe Moorhead coach, especially at Penn State, his ability to create one-on-one matchups with his playmakers in space is going to be his most positive attribute that he can lead this team. So I'm in agreement with you. I picked Mississippi State right in the area of 9-3 this year. They could possibly be 10-2 with an upset special, either over Alabama or over LSU like they did last year. They dominated LSU last year, 37-7. Again, it does hinge on the health of Nick Fitzgerald. I know he's ahead of schedule, but it's different when you're coming back from an ACL injury, especially when you're a mobile quarterback. We have to see his mobility week number 1 under center. But barring that, I think Mississippi State is going to be there in the West. So they do face Alabama the second week after LSU. I'm curious to see how that game plays out in 2018. And when you look at South Carolina, again, in order for South Carolina to take the next step within the SEC, they are going to need to run the football more consistently. Put a lot of pressure on Jake Bentley last year. Rico Dowdle did get hurt late in the year, but still, this was an offense that could not run the football between the tackles and feasted off of turnovers last year. They lose their big play linebacker, Skay Moore, that moves on to the NFL. So again, I picked South Carolina, take a slight step back to 7-5, because you're right. Going from 9-4 overall to possibly 10 or 11 in Columbia is going to be very difficult. When you look at their 2018 schedule, it is not easy. A lot of difficult road games. So that's why I think South Carolina takes a minor step back in 2018, although Jake Bentley is one of the most promising quarterbacks within the conference.
You mentioned the Bulldogs' effort against LSU, dominating them at home 37-7. This is one of the reasons why I think Alabama sneaks out of the West once again, is unfortunately for the better teams in the West, meaning Mississippi State and Auburn. Of course, Auburn won the Iron Bowl at home on the Plains last year. They will have to go to Tuscaloosa. Mississippi State, one of the under-the-radar games late in the season that could have knocked Alabama out of the playoff, was Mississippi State had them on the ropes and should have made a few other plays and protected the football a little bit better, and Calvin Ridley burned them, and Saban and company got out of Starkville alive. But of course, Mississippi State has to go to Tuscaloosa this year. And I'm not one of those people that automatically, oh, you got to go on the road, you're going to lose just because it's a road game. But it does kind of tip the scales about 70-30 for an even matchup, 75-25, depending on the stadium. Of course, Joe, unfortunately, I could talk college football all night. I got to move along, but I want to drag you through the Big 12, because Oklahoma's dominated the last few years. They were clearly the best team the last 3 years. And then we've got a situation, though, with no Baker Mayfield, of course, and with some personnel losses on defense, even though their defense wasn't that good. They're really thin this year. TCU probably the best defense in the league. Some would say Texas. They got to decide on the quarterback. It's probably Ellinger, but I really love the Texas defense, considering they came within a score of Oklahoma State overtime on the road, USC overtime on the road. I think Texas, man, I'm really leaning Texas at this point, but how do you handicap it at this point?
I love Texas this year. They're my sleeper in the dark horse. We'll start with Texas overall. I'm in the camp that, although Ellinger played very well last year, I lean to Shane Buechele, which gives them more experience, especially when they start a very difficult 2018 schedule overall. They start with Maryland on the road. You're going to need that experience. So I lean to Buechele the way he played against Missouri. Now, a couple of factors why I love Texas. Let's start. Last year, battle-tested team. They were 4-3 on the road. Their 2 road wins that were very impressive, on the road against West Virginia, on the road against Iowa. They got those victories. They also lost 4 games by a total of 15 points. That was 3.7 points per game. They lost to Oklahoma in the Red River rivalry with Mayfield by only 5 points. But defensively is where they had huge strides. And I was a believer that Charlie Strong was getting it done slowly, not the way the Texas faithful wanted, but he was recruiting the type of talent to make them an elite team. You look at what they did defensively. They held opposing offenses to 106 rushing yards per game, 27% on third down conversions, and more importantly, did record 32 total sacks in the Big 12. They're going to be much better defensively in 2018, even though they lose Malik Jefferson. Tom Herman weeded out the players that fit his scheme. I like Texas overall this year. Their combined winning percentage of their 2018 opponents is only .522, even though they have to face USC and they have to face Maryland early eligible. That I think they get through with an 11-1 record. So I'm all in with Texas, selling Oklahoma, but I'm buying Oklahoma State with new quarterback Drew Brown from Hawaii.
Yeah, so Texas, it's a bit of a surprise that they actually took a step back offensively last year compared to the Charlie Strong offenses, which were not good. I think that's just a situation where Tom Herman was implementing his system. I expect them to be much better offensively in year two. They're pretty fortified at wide receiver with a ton of returning starters. Colin Johnson had 55 catches last year. And when you look at defensively, yeah, they lost Poona Ford, Deshaun Elliott, Holton Hill, Malik Jefferson, as you mentioned. But at the same time, they recruited and signed, I think the number was 5 of the top 15, one school, 5 of the top 15 defensive backs in the country went to Texas and signed there, including B.J. Foster. I don't know if all those guys are going to make an impact, but I would guess 2 or 3. So they're coming. There's no question about that. What do you think about Will Grier, West Virginia? He's the only experienced playmaking quarterback, at least among the contenders, that's back.
Yeah, I picked West Virginia to be a minor sleeper at 10-2. Now, their schedule really starts fast. They open up against Tennessee, and they have a week 3 matchup against NC State and Ryan Finley in Raleigh. To me, that will make or break their season. But I picked them at 10-2 overall. Will Grier, I mean, one of the best quarterbacks within college football in 2018, 34 touchdown passes, did get hurt against Texas last year. He has an experienced wide receiver core with David Sills coming back. This team needs to get better running the football. They only average around 125 rushing yards per game in the last 8 games of the year. That was with Justice Crawford. But they need to get better down the stretch running the football. If they can run the football and take the pressure off the offensive line and Will Grier to lead games. I mean, he had 9 straight 300-yard games last year. They rode him to a 7-6 overall record. But again, if they can run the football, I think they could be right there in the mix. I picked them at 10-2 overall, but their schedule and their season hinges on that week 3 matchup in Raleigh. If they could get that victory in dominating fashion, this could be a magical season for Dana Holgorsen and the crew.
College football fans, do yourself a favor. Go to Go for the 2. That's the number 2, goforthe2.com. Check out the information, the insight, and the knowledge right there. Also, go to Twitter, look up Go for the 2. It's Joe Lisi right there on college football. Nobody packs the stats, the information, and the insight like Mr. Joe Lisi. Appreciate you stopping by, Joe. It's always a pleasure, and hope everything's going well. And I will be inviting you back very soon.
Anytime, Mark. Love talking college football. Love the show.